You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News. Balitang thinking, hindi breaking. In this episode,
And so, by the authority vested in me as the Chief of Staff Armed Forces of the Philippines, I now formally declare the Philippines, United States exercise Balikatan 38-2023 open.
the US-Philippines alliance is firing on all cylinders this week, just as China ends military drills around Taiwan.
This year's event, the 38th Philippine-US Balikatan activation will have a total of 17,680 participants, making this exercise the largest ever of the AAP and the U.S. Armed Forces, as well as our counterparts from the Australian Defense Force.
That's General Andres Centino, Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. He was speaking at the opening ceremony of the annual joint drills between Washington and Manila.
As the magnitude of this year's exercise is a testament to the deepening alliance between and among our countries.
As drills began in the Philippines, top Manila officials were in Washington. Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo and Defense Chief Carlito Galvez Jr. traveled to attend a special ministerial dialogue with their American counterparts.
I'm actually in Washington, also for the 2+2 dialogue, which will resume tomorrow after a 7-year hiatus. And this highlights the positive trajectory of our bilateral relations, which is happening now at all levels, and the shared intention of Manila and Washington to sustain this momentum.
That's Secretary Manalo, speaking at the forum hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. This is all playing out against the backdrop of heightened tensions over Taiwan. China unleashed a fresh round of live-fire drills around the island in response to President Tsai Ing-wen's U.S. visit. On the third day of drills, Beijing's Navy appeared to simulate its first-ever aircraft carrier strike on Taipei. So when Secretary Manalo sat down with analysts and reporters this week, there was plenty to talk about. Here's a snippet of the Q&A portion of the CSIS forum, moderated by Senior Fellow Gregory Poling.
Well, let me address the other elephant in the room, Taiwan. So there are almost 200,000 Filipinos living in Taiwan. President Marcos has said that that any contingency, any crisis around Taiwan would involve Philippine interests in some form or another. So what is the discussion like at the moment in Manila about how a Taiwan crisis affects Philippine national interests?
Taiwan is literally next door to the Philippines, so it's just looking at that, any kind of escalation of tensions or even worse, some kind of a conflict, military conflict, would have really adverse repercussions on the Philippines. Of course, it would probably have repercussions on the entire region, but particularly the Philippines, given our proximity. And so we naturally look at concern with that. And we've always urged the parties concerned to try and, let's say, manage these tensions by having, wherever possible, dialogue in order to prevent these tensions from escalating into something more. Because our view is that not only would it affect the Philippines, but it would affect the entire region, and it could escalate into even something more dangerous.
We'll pause here for a quick word from our sponsors. More on Taiwan when we return. Ahead of this action-packed week, Malacanang identified 4 new Philippine sites that American troops will have access to. This brings the total number of sites covered by the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, to 9. 3 of the new EDCA sites are in the provinces of Cagayan and Isabela, near Taiwan. They're the Camilo Osayas Naval Base, Lalo Airport, and Camp Melchor de la Cruz. The fourth is in Balabac Island, Palawan, which borders the West Philippine Sea. But Manila is playing down the significance of these locations. Here's Greg Poling of CSIS and Foreign Secretary Manalo again.
Will U.S. weaponry, such as artillery and missile systems, be allowed on EDCA sites for a defense of Taiwan contingency? Will there be any restrictions on what can be stationed at the sites?
So at this stage, it's really very difficult to respond to questions like that. It will all depend on how discussions go, on the type of activities, and the terms of reference of those activities within any of those sites.
Geopolitical experts we spoke to point out that before the new EDCA sites were announced, the terms of reference likely would have been ironed out already. Even President Marcos is taking pains to assure that the new sites will only be used for humanitarian assistance.
Ngayon, ang reaction ng China ay hindi naman siguro katakataka dahil nag-aalala sila, pero hindi tayo papayag na gamitin ang mga bases natin para sa kahit anong offensive na action. Ito ay para lamang tulungan ang Pilipinas kapag nangangailangan ng tulong ang Pilipinas. Kaya kung wala namang sumusugod sa atin, hindi na sila kailangan mag-alala dahil hindi naman sila natin lalabanan.
But it's not just China protesting increased U.S. military presence here.
Kaya ang tanong ng kabataan dito ngayon, seguridad para kanino?
Ahead of the Balikatan exercises, 6 students demonstrating outside the U.S. Embassy were detained by Manila police.
Dahil malinaw na hindi ito seguridad para sa ating bansa. Tama! Sinisiyak nito!
There were even small protests as far away as New York City.
There's no doubt that we, the Filipino people, must fight tooth and nail to defend our sovereignty!
Protesters say all this is just another display of American firepower in Asia. And so Secretary Manalo was asked about this, the delicate issue of sovereignty, which is what all this boils down to.
How does the Philippine government safeguard the country's sovereignty when it comes to the U.S. military presence in the Philippines? I assume this is a reference to the long debates around criminal jurisdiction and the like around U.S. soldiers.
Well, we're governed by the Mutual Defense Treaty. And any activity which is undertaken in that context would have to merit the agreement of the parties concerned, especially the Philippines. And we try, and any activity should be fully consistent with our Constitution. And I think that's the basic means we have for ensuring that our sovereignty is protected, even though we may have our alliance and we may have activities. It should be in accordance with our constitutional requirements.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Pedoy Blanco. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or two. And don't forget to follow Teka Teka News and Puma Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. At para sa mga mahilig manood sa YouTube, Puma Podcast na rin po kami doon. Just search Puma Podcast and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for listening.